the community partner, perspective. So I kind of want to jump right in because one of the main concepts here today is equity, because of course we're talking equitable partnerships. However, I totally understand that everyone here knows what equity is and the difference between like equity versus like equality. But that's really where we want to focus in for the majority of today's presentation. So I am trying to pull up these slides, but I kind of like to go around for just a minute with like a check-in question. First off, what has everyone experience been when you work with academics and maybe don't know as much as you do as someone with community engagement experience or lived experience and expertise? So that's kind of our check-in question for everyone today as we're starting to join. So I'm just going to start randomly calling people because I know you're all so anxious to join in, and I don't want you like tripping all over yourself. So Tori, would you mind jumping in and just kind of leading us off with your experience a little bit on, how you felt as far as having an equitable partnership with an academic?
Um, Gosh, I was hoping someone would go first so I could kind of pattern. Can you give an example of the flow so that I can kind of
Mm-hmm.
match?
Sure. So I'll just give you an example for me. So I've been in situations where I'm representing like family voice with people who are professionals. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I know for sure that they think they're including me, but really they're just saying, hey, let me give you a little, like you can give a little input, but I'm really the expert here. And so that left me feeling like we weren't really equitable partners. They weren't really viewing me as a partner. I've been in other scenarios where it's been a little bit more like, hey, you have expertise in this, I have expertise in that. Let's come together. So, just wondering maybe what your experience has been when you work or have worked, or even if you just have some reservations about working with academic partners and feeling like you're both in an equal or equitable partnership.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thanks for setting that up. I feel like that. My experience has been yes, where it feels like I'm not kind of on the equal playing field um, with uh, with some partners. And then what I often do is I just pause. And oftentimes folks see that they're talking the most. And then I'll just kind of wait for the invitation sometime to give my opinion because I think sometimes that is people assume that you don't know about a topic or don't or can't contribute on a topic because of their perceived level of experience that they think you are in. And so often I'll just wait for the invitation to share. And then other times when not given the invitation, then I just offer it. And in offering it over time, it's demonstrated that, oh, maybe she does have something to contribute. Maybe my assumptions were wrong, so that I can have more room at the table of discussion with my partners. But yes, that happens to me quite often. Being, for instance, in academia, being a family member or having representing family voice, oftentimes the assumption is that you may not know as much as educators or academics know about a subject matter. Just kind of underestimate the amount of participation that you've had in the field, just because of the placement of where I am. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does, but what's interesting to me about what you've said is that it sounds like once you're able to kind of break through and offer your expertise, that there is a responsiveness to it, right? It sounds like you're not getting dismissed. You are being treated in a respectful manner. So you feel like once you're able to demonstrate, hey, I have something to offer here and are able to contribute, then in your experience, they've gone, oh, okay, maybe I was wrong here, or maybe I need to look at this differently. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, yes. And that's when I do try to, I just try not to. Sometimes I find that if I insert, sometimes that doesn't go over as well. But if I wait, um, I feel like it's oftentimes more better received. But yes, when I do push forward to offer my input, I can be at least listened to. Not quite sure as far as like equal, but definitely listened to respectfully.
Okay, great. And so the next person on my screen is Angelica. Would you like to check in and just kind of talk about your experiences?
Sure, I can go next. So kind of thinking about it here, I think luckily with some of the engagement we've had with academics, so we work with children 0 to 5, so we work with maternal child health professors. So we've had them come to our coalition meetings. We've met with them before. I'm going to say we've had a pretty positive experience. I think oftentimes we may, get a little intimidated or think that academics might talk down to us. But luckily, I feel like they've been very informative and engaging. So, I may not know so much about the coalition side and family engagement and engaging community members, but here's what I have to offer. So far, so good. But in the future, we may not be as lucky.
Well, that's what we're going to get into today, right? What do you do when you might not be as lucky? But I do think the interesting thing that you brought up is, and as I was doing research to try to talk about this, the thing that kept coming up was this idea that there could be some intimidation or a feeling of either they won't accept us, they won't view us as experts, or just there's been so many times where there's been that research extraction or there's been so many negative experiences that there can be that kind of issue. So in my experience, what I've learned also is in supporting families, even when they're having to advocate in any kind of system, is that, your whole life you're kind of told, don't question the doctor, don't talk back to the teacher, all those kinds of things. And then all of a sudden you're in a scenario where people are saying, no, you should engage, you are an equal, you come with lived experience, and that can be really challenging. So I'm glad you brought up that part of it, because I wasn't really sure if that was going to resonate with this group, because I know everyone here is so used to bringing forward that lived experience and viewing, that as really critical and important. So I'm glad that resonates with you. Um,
Absolutely. And if I may just a little more as well. I can definitely see, from the family side, we do have a lot of Spanish speaking families here. So when we bring in, academics and professors, even myself, I get a little nervous and I'm like, oh, what if what if they think what I'm saying is silly? But from the family side, I can definitely see more so of that intimidation. So thank you for bringing that up
Yeah,
too.
no, that's a great point, because there's the cultural aspect as well, right? Some of us also are generally we're taught don't talk back to the teacher, but some of us are taught that in a number of different ways. So whether it's just the cultural kind of respect your elders, respect authority, respect certain positions, but then also some of us have other consequences when we aren't viewed as being respectful or we're being viewed as questioning authority. So it can be a little bit different to be in a position where now you're wanting to sit at the table as an equal and figure out how do you navigate that. So that's a really great point as well. Jesse, did you want to jump in?
So a lot of times I'm in a room where that is predominantly male. The staff
Mhm.
is, if I'm dealing with academia, it's usually very receptive. That they're receptive. If I'm dealing with administrative staff that is from a correction standpoint, that predominantly male staff is not as receptive, and they are attempting to be slightly intimidating. So that is a situation where I'm more observant initially, and then what I'm attempting to do is checking to see I will step in and speak in a more supportive role if needed. And I may have to come from an impactful role if I need to, from a lived experience standpoint, which will then allow them to step back, listen, and we'll move forward from there.
Okay, so
Because
that's
initially,
interesting.
when they look at me, they don't think I have lived experience. They're assuming I'm something else when they first see me. They don't even
Mhm.
assume that I have lived experience. So then when
Okay,
I step in, they listen.
so I'd like to understand that a little bit better because we've done a lot of work on the academic side with narrative storytelling, even in policy making, lived experience. So are you finding when you say, hey, this is my experience, this is what I've actually lived through, then that kind of stops it and people are able to receive that and kind of reset a little bit? Is that persuasive for you?
Yes, if because a lot of the times, yes, it actually slows them down. And I don't like to come from that aspect because I don't lead with that. Usually
Mm-hmm.
I lead with the facts that we're whatever we're discussing at the time. And as I said, if I'm dealing with academia in the room, we can just have a discussion. But if I'm dealing with staff that are coming from corrections or criminal background, I may have to step into my lived experience and stop them so that we can have a discussion.
So are we thinking this is about, oh, I can argue with the numbers, kind of abstract, but when someone says, oh, no, 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 I've experienced this, and it's kind of hard for them to try to argue against it. And they've got, like, you leave them a little, like, less room to be,
And not even argue so much as actually listen. It's sometimes hard for people to understand that communication requires active
do that.
listening as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Thomas, I know you want to come in here.
Yeah, I just want to share my experience with academia, and then, my first engagement with academia was with Morehouse School of Medicine in 2012. And when they first invited me to be on this community coalition board that they have, my assumption automatically was I'm community. I have this lived experience. I know this, and that. I'm gonna come teach them something. And so there's this assumption of the way I was going to approach it. And then when I got there, I found out that this community coalition board actually leads and governs the research that the Prevention Research Center at Morehouse School of Medicine does. And so, it was a matter of just stepping into leadership, and they did community engagement or community-led research very well, and they still do it to this day. I'm still on that board. I'm the vice chair of that board now, and so when we think about that aspect of the way research that engages community should be done, it's literally led by the community. We can veto whatever type of research they want to do. We've helped expand their core research project. They've been funded by the CDC for 28 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's this because of this community coalition board and the leadership that they bring to it, it's really an amazing thing. On the flip side, I've also been a part of academic partnerships that they say they're community led, but academia is the one studying it, naming it, measuring it. They fund it. And so they don't really bring true community building to the space where they're connected to the people who are closest to the issues, places. And so they still think that they are dictating to the groups that are part of the foundation or whatever. So when we think about, community building, and a lot of, when it comes to research, a community-led framing that's led by community is much stronger because community members are identifying the goals that matter to them. They're developing plans. They're building on the strengths that they have and creating relationships with their external partners. Now, academics, one of the things I learned in my partnership with Morehouse School of Medicine is that there's a value on both sides. I've learned so much about community-based research over these 14 years that I see the value of bringing academics to the table, as well as how community is at the table. And I think a lot of times, what I've experienced with that group is that when community is empowered to a level of being heard from the beginning, it makes a significant difference in how things flow and respect for one another and input and the ability for community to really just jump in and provide their expertise as well as listening to the research expertise from the other side. So there's two different ways that I've experienced this.
Great, thank you. And bringing up that idea of it being, both sides is kind of what we, want to talk about. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and just that ability to kind of see what the academics are bringing to the table too, because I think that can be difficult when there's so many instances where we are dismissed, where we have had these negative experiences, and then you think, well, they're, locked in a tower somewhere crunching numbers, where I'm out here experiencing and living this. And so, kind of seeing that there is some value add on the academic side as well is really that core of like the equitable piece that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that, and I just want to throw this in there because you're right, but it just depends on the academic mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, we were knee deep in a grant proposal and writing this grant. And we had an academic partner who we've worked with in many other areas. And so we were kind of expanding that partnership. The day before the grant was to be submitted, I get a call and they're like, well, we're going to punt on this one and we can go in for the next grant that comes out, blah, blah, blah. And
Mm-hmm.
we had already brought all the community representatives together, all the other partners. I mean, we put a lot of work into this for the academic to say, we're going to punt this to the next time. Gratefully, I had another academic partner that I was able to switch to, and we were still able to get that grant in with, I was at Six Flags Magic Mountain in California and had to leave and go do all this stuff. But um, we were able to shift and we have other academic partners that are always on board and they understand like the value of community building and community-led framework. And so we were able to shift and it was good. But, for an academic partner to not look at community as being valued enough to where the day before, less than 24 hours before this grant is due, to just back out and say, we're going to punt, that's the kind of stuff that I've also experienced that was just totally wrong. And there's been many experiences both ways, but I just use those as examples.
Yeah, those are great examples. Thank you. Maria Elena?
Sure. Hi. Okay, I
Hi.
work with the Bernalillo County Home Visiting Work Group, and we work with early childhood. I work with Angelica. We work with amazing people. They have the children at the center. We really haven't had that issue. We work with UNM. We've had them present. We're just great coalition, but we talk about our gente here. We really are a close community. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot, it's New Mexico, but the communities are very, very close. So we don't have too many of that problem. But I did have that issue. I used to work for the Albuquerque Public Schools, and I was trying to get some money to create a database. And so I had to go to the superintendents and the
Mm-hmm.
principals, and I had to go present it. I walked in and I presented it, and he goes, "Let me just explain something to you, Maria." And he puts up a pyramid and he says, "Maria, you're here and you have several levels to get to the top."
Hmm.
And I just told him, "Sir, I'm not trying to get to the top. I'm trying to get money for the community that we
Mm-hmm.
can all use this for our children." So I think a lot of it is I have had a lot of experience, so they don't intimidate me, and that could be with
Mm-hmm.
age. But you move on. You walk in that door because you deserve to be there. And you have to remember your passion and your power when you walk in that door and you talk to them, because we
Mm-hmm.
still deal with a lot of them right now. We're constantly dealing with the health community, the doctors, and
Mm-hmm.
the pediatricians, but we don't leave that behind. We keep it at the center. The children are at the center. Why are we doing this? We will not be intimidated. So I guess that's what it comes from.
Yeah, that's really great. And also, I think you bring up a good point because we are talking about academics in particular, but obviously this, applies to a lot of different places where you're trying to make sure that, community voice is being heard and is leading, and also that it's valued. And so that I appreciate you sharing that experience. And then also just that even the thread with Thomas, right? He had another academic partner he could work with, but like you said, you continue to have to interact with those individuals today, especially those of us who are in smaller, close-knit kind of communities. It may not go smoothly at first. It may not go smoothly the second time or the fifth time, but oftentimes we do end up having to go back and interact with these folks over and over again. So it is an important reminder. Thank you. I I think Isaac is the final person.
Yes, ma'am. I could speak to that. We actually just came back from this housing studies conference in the UK a couple months ago. I'll say like speaking to people in academia, I would say like I could feel that talking down piece a little bit sometimes, but that could be for other factors. But there was actually some people who was open to hearing about the lived experience, and we ended up building a partnership from that.
That's great. And so the people who were dismissive, you said, okay, that's who you are. And then you found other people who wanted to engage, who valued what you had to offer. And so now you've been able to develop a partnership.
Yeah, and for most of the academia, like when they're presenting their research, I can feel like there's a missing piece. And lived experience, like we're not trying to provide a solution to their problem, but we do believe the people closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. So when they're presenting their research, I can just like feel the missing piece, like, oh, like if you guys just, involve the people that you guys are researching on, then you would be much closer to that solution that you're trying to get to. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry, I'm going to leave my camera off, which I had to do last time, but it's okay. So I just want to reiterate that point, right? Like you can always tell that something is missing whenever you work in those spaces and you're connecting with academics or you're at a conference. There's always just that little piece. I actually attended an economics conference in Ireland a couple of months ago, maybe a month ago. And one of the things that they were talking about is the use of cell phones by the parents and how that matches up with cell phone use for the child or the youth. And there were all these other kinds of things, but what was missing was really basic information about what kinds of jobs did those parents have, what kind of access were people in certain communities. So you're comparing someone in an urban environment against someone in a rural area where they may not even have the same access to internet and smartphone, those kinds of pieces where if you just take a moment to talk to people, you might actually be able to get a little more context and understand what's going on a little bit more broadly. So sometimes you can hear it. But I want to really emphasize that what we've heard here is that there's two sort of failure modes in this. And so I know that's kind of strong language, but it's kind of like the that I want everyone to really like focus on. Let me turn this. This is uncomfortable for me. Okay. So the one is that you end up deferring to them, which we talked about, right? Because a lot of us, again, grew up with that idea that, a certain status, a certain social standing, a particular degree, that you have to automatically defer and that you're not an equal sitting at the table. And so then that's one side of it. The other side is being dismissive. So we want to try to find that sweet spot in the middle where it's not like, oh, you have nothing to offer as an academic because you don't live this every day, versus, oh, you're the academic. I'm just this person who's coming in, I don't have expertise, and really kind of being in that sweet spot in the middle. The reality that I think a lot of us have faced is that the academic sometimes walks in with that dismissive piece. So they're kind of on that end of it, of the spectrum. And then oftentimes community members are on the other side, on the other failure mode of deferring too easily. But what we really want to do is talk about what we just discussed, which is what each side holds as their expertise that they're bringing. And so I want to just take a moment to kind of talk about some of the things. I know, Thomas, you mentioned that you've learned some things about community-based participatory research, but there's some other things that academics kind of bring to the table. And so some of that is just resources and the ability to access. Some of it is signaling that, hey, I'm partnering with X university and this big professor. What are some of the other things? IRB, we want to make sure if you're doing anything related to people, you're able to say, hey, we're not doing anything unethical or experimenting in a way that's going to harm the community. So what are some of the things that partnering with an academic or an academic institution can actually bring to us? And so, Isaac, since you're still up on my screen, do you mind starting off with that? Like, what is your new partnership that you identified?
For sure, and I would say it was somebody who was closer to having lived experience. Like they weren't completely. And the phrase that I put in the chat is like out of touch. That's what I feel when talking to like academia, and uh that's what I feel. That's what I feel. Like they're kind of like out of touch, and that's like you said. That's not to put them lower. Like they're not lower than me because they're out of touch, and I'm not lower than them because I don't have that status or degree. But I can just feel the disconnect. But we did have this partnership from somebody from Canada, and their presentation at the Housing Studies conference was about changing the language surrounding homelessness. So
Mm-hmm.
using phrases like unhoused neighbors, housing instability, rather than putting that negative connotation on people who don't have a roof over their heads. Um, yeah, so we really just helped them clean up their research paper, and yeah, we was just putting our own lived experience touch on it. So that was what our partnership was about.
Yeah, I think that's amazing because and I see, sorry, I didn't have the chat box open, but I see your comment about being out of touch. I think that actually kind of flips to the next part of the conversation, which is what do you bring, right? So someone whose expertise is in this one lane and they're an academic and they understand how to navigate some of these things and they may understand some of the statistics that go into it and all of those pieces. That's what they're bringing, right? But when you say out of touch, it's really more, as you said, it's not necessarily a negative, right? It's just saying here's a gap in their expertise and you are able to fill that gap. And so that is where, you're positioning it as, hey, this is something that I offer and that's the equitable part. That's where you offer expertise and they offer expertise. It's those pieces that they're just not going to know. And they're also not going to know in a way that looks legitimate to a funder. So in the same way that it works for a lot of community-based organizations to be able to say, hey, I'm partnering with this university or this institution and this academic space, and kind of here's the name and the reputation and all of those pieces. For the academic institution, it is equally, if not even more important for them to be able to say, I am connected to the community. I am getting this information. I recognize that I have this gap in my expertise and I am filling this gap. And so I see that Jesse's saying academia is more receptive and more open to learning new ways of thinking. And I would agree with you. I think where we want to try to figure out the kind of the rub on that is, in my experience, I can't speak for anyone else, but in my experience, a lot of times academics do believe that they are open to learning new ways of thinking, and they do believe that they are receptive. but it could be extractive, Thomas. And let's talk about why there might be some barriers to them being able to actually engage in that equitable way. And the reason we want to talk about this, as we did last time we did a training, is because we want to understand like how to position ourselves when we're talking and when we're trying to navigate the partnerships. So, do we think some reasons are that someone might not be receptive, or that they may think something like, let's say, I get feedback, I get your input, but I'm still the final decision maker. Sometimes people believe that that's actual, genuine engagement, that that's actually bringing in lived experience. And that's just been my experience. They have a genuine belief that they're doing this. Why might that be? Jesse, any thoughts on why academia might be interacting that way?
I think that's a whole different topic.
Are we sure?
Oh, I'm positive.
It's okay. Let's go.
Yeah.
Why?
So I'm going to leave that question totally alone. That's two different questions. Well, if what I was engaging in when I made that statement was if I'm sitting up and we're engaged in a topic, then when I'm speaking to academia, they're more open if we're all on a specific topic. If we're comparing to what we were doing last week, that was entirely different. We were talking about two different topics.
Oh, no. But I'm here with you. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I was just saying what we want to do is understand the other person's
academia is
perspective.
just trained to being more open when there's a discussion on the table. They're just more trained to being more open when there's a discussion on the table. Their minds are just open. Now, if they have a certain stand on a topic, they have more etiquette when they're speaking. Their stance is they're strong in their stance because they know how to debate a certain topic or whatever. But I do feel that they have the ability to be more receptive. But if they believe a certain way, that's human nature. If you believe a certain way, you believe a certain way. Human nature steps in at that point.
So it's human nature.
Sure.
If there's a belief that's already there. Okay.
If there's a belief system in play, there's a belief system within all of us. Human nature is going to step in.
So, okay. Thomas, what do you think?
So, in my experience, I believe that a lot of times the academics at the table, really have genuine uh, desire to work with community. They have, you can see from the initial engagement, there's parameters that they have to follow, especially they're part of an academic institution. So that sometimes doesn't allow them to have the freedom to do some of the things they want to do because they represent a much larger institution. They also have budget constraints and how they pay out and different other things. So a lot of times, the challenges that I've faced with academic institutions there, is that they often find themselves having to make decisions. So I use the example that I shared from last year. I believe that their intention was to really walk through this, but they didn't have the flexibility to work on the schedule that we had for the grant. And because they didn't have that flexibility or that agility to maneuver within the parameters that we had without getting permission, they had to back out at the last minute. I don't believe that they really wanted to cause harm, but harm is what they caused. And that's what I find like a lot of academic institutions do. And on the flip side, a lot of um, community networks and agencies don't really see that side of what's happening from them. And so they'll take it and make it a personal thing when they have to learn how to navigate through it. And so for us, we didn't just stop and throw up our hands because, we have this experience with, our academic partners. We can really just, roll with what happened and still deliver something that's very intentional around the work that we're doing. And so, my thing is, academics, some of the things that get in the way are bureaucracy. Some of it is bias. Some of it is ego, because no academic who's gone through all these years of getting a PhD wants to hear someone from the community say, I know this space better than you. And I'll give you an example. I had an opportunity to partner with an academic that I've been working with for years on putting in a HERA grant proposal. And the last conversation he and I had, the way he was talking about people who are transitioning out of problem is like they have this problem and they can't do this and it was literally a big put down. And I had a choice to make whether I wanted to partner with that person. And I think in his ego and in his bias, and this is the type of work he works in, he didn't realize the things he was saying about a community he really wants to serve. And so that goes back to what Isaac was saying, that the people are just out of touch sometimes. And so I think those are things that can disrupt an academic partnership and not really being able to see the value of community leadership.
Great. So far, I think when you talk about bias and ego, I think that goes back to Jesse's idea that there's already kind of an entrenched point of view in place. And then on top of it, there's some institutional kinds of constraints, right? There's things that are happening within the institution. There might be bureaucracy. There could be any number of things that are going on that might be causing that. Is that's fair to say, Jesse? Can I get a like, mm-hmm, or a mm-mm?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
sure. It's not personal. It just is what it is. Yes.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to throw this on because you reminded me of something. These are people's jobs also. So they're going to
Mhm.
do what they can to protect their job. When it comes to getting new funding and moving forward, they kind of know what the buzz is going on around funding and everything else and whether or not what they're a part of. If they let things go and empower community, truly empower community, sometimes that's a scary place to be because now you're putting your livelihood in the hands of community people who may not understand research precepts or principles or constraints and structures. And so you don't want to put your livelihood in people's hands you know, that you don't know how it's going to turn out. And again, I have a partnership with Morehouse School of Medicine that I've been working with some people for a very long time, and they've been a part of this work much longer, and they've put all their, not all of it, but a big portion of what they do into the community's hands, and it's been highly successful for decades. And so, I've seen both sides of that.
Yeah, so Marilyn, I'm going to get to you but I just want to give like a ding, 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 ding. So a couple of things that we wanted to talk about here. So one is, again, understanding where people have been rewarded for their careers and what that means for their future. So when Jesse says they have a particular point of view and they're going to argue it, and you say ego bias, I think that's true. It also means that if I've been publishing in this area and saying that it means one thing for the past however long, and that's how I built my career, and that is my reputation, and that is basically how academia works as far as your ability to feed your family. Now you're coming in and saying, whoops, none of that's true. All you kind of have in academia is that credibility and your research record and all of those things. So you might be so that's why when I mentioned last time, we want to think about how the other side is viewing this and why it might be, so that when you're talking to them, you might be able to have a different kind of negotiation conversation. So that's one piece, is understanding that they may be entrenched in an idea. It may be what they've seen. The other thing, Thomas, that you said is research. I think hopefully most of us will remember, being in elementary school and For me, I think I did like some sort of solar thing for 1 year for my science fair project. And another year, I remember so well, I took the regular version of food and the diet version of food. And I did a little thing with my chemistry set I got for Christmas. And I basically showed they all had the same amount of fat. And it's funny because now I do environmental things and I do health things. And somehow I knew that when I was like 10. But the idea is that I learned about the scientific process. And one of the things that you learn in the scientific process is you don't want to have multiple variables. You don't want to have multiple things that you're testing for. And so sometimes that means that what's happening in the real world can't be experimented on in this controlled environment. And so we learn that at an early age, and you kind of forget about it until you start thinking about academia. And if I'm a researcher and you're saying, oh, but what about this? But what about this? What about this? What about this? And they're going, but my hypothesis is this. And I need to be very specific. And academia and a lot of these spaces reward people who are very highly specialized. And so you're now throwing in all these variables that one may contradict everything I've built in my entire career, and two don't actually fit into the scientific process that I need to be able to make this research valid and worthwhile. Now, the other thing, Thomas, that you hit on, it was like ding, 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 is this idea of peers. So when you say what's going on around you, we talk a lot about this, right? There's the peer review process. And that concept of who a peer is what we want to change as of today. This is what we're discussing right now. How do you become that equal partner? But realize there are peers within the whatever the expertise, the specialization, that community that academic partner is a part of. Those are the people who are deciding if you get published. Those are the people you're bumping into at the conferences, and who decide if you get to present. Those are the people who are also reviewing funding. In fact, those end up being the people who decide what goes into the RFPs for the funding before that. And so understanding that they're also looking at what does the peer scientific community also see, because that has an enormous impact on their livelihoods, but also just the ability to even further and continue research. So those are kind of three key points that I wanted to bring out as far as understanding the other side. And as you said, sometimes it is just that bias and people are entrenched in their ideas. The other side is that there are some real kind of structures that prevent people sometimes, not necessarily that they're conscious of it, but that these are systems that people have been sort of brought up in. This is how they have gone through their entire career paths. This is how they've been rewarded. And so while people, as you said, genuinely do want to connect with community, they also go, okay, now I need to take that and put it into the context of a research environment where we can actually move forward with it. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And Maria Elena, I know you wanted to jump in.
I did. Okay, so 2 days ago, I went to a meeting and it was called Civic and Community Engagement. And there was these two gentlemen there. We're always trying to invite the civic group to come and join us. And of course, they don't come. But this particular meeting, two of them came. They both had their doctorate in research. And they wanted to know what we all were doing because they were on the planning committee for the city of Albuquerque. And they are deciding, they're the deciding factor of where they're planning maybe parks and schools and how to do roads. And so here they are at an early childhood meeting. And I said, "What are you guys here?" And they said, "Well, we just want to know what the community thinks." I said, "Okay, do you really want to know what they think? Because I can sit with you for 4 hours and tell you what they want, what they need." And he says, "We really do, because we're creating all of these facilities and all. We don't really know." I said, "Well, did you know if a family walks out the street and walks in the neighborhood, you might have created a beautiful park. Did you know they can't go to that park because there's needles in that park? There's a safety issue." And he said, "I didn't know that." And so as we grew, it became a relationship. And now they're going to pay for one of our family dialogue circles and meet with us and meet with the community to find out what they want. So it's about kind of opening yourself to a relationship. Don't assume because they are doctors and they do research that they don't care, because truly everybody cares in some way or another. So it's finding that relationship and that way to connect. That's it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that can be really difficult for communities, and particularly when you start getting into people who work in, say, government policy, those kinds of spaces. So it is difficult when you're talking about academia, but we can also take a step back and talk about that as well. And I think I may have mentioned before, in another life when I was an elected policymaker, it used to just like devastate me because I grew up in the community, knew people, they voted for me, they trusted me. And then whenever I had to make a decision that didn't align with what the community necessarily wanted, immediately, I mean, like, people turned so quick. It's like, oh, you're a dirty politician. It was like, wait a minute, I went to church with you. Like, what do you mean? You don't actually care about the community. And it's like, no, 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 no. But I guess there's a few things that I kind of can't discuss publicly. It could be that it was a HR issue behind the scenes. It could be, there's all kinds of other things that are going on and competing interests. Or it could be that somebody I know is also is not going to agree with it. And so I'm not going to just say I'm going to push and let that be the hill that I die on, knowing that it's not going to work. And I could probably get funding for something else that the community also wants. So there are all these nuance pieces. And I think that goes back to kind of what Thomas said, but I think it's so important that you kind of brought that up, is leading with the assumption that people are all kind of on the same page, but they do have gaps in their expertise. They may have other institutional factors that they're dealing with. And I do think that you're right. It is that time and your experience over the years and working with people and developing the relationships and knowing who they are and not instantly erasing all that the second things don't go. And it's not like, I don't mean the way you want them in a negative way, but in a way that doesn't seem like it's aligned with the community. And I think, yeah, you do have to choose your battles within the parameters. That's kind of the issue. And I think we all know that, being even in community-based organizations, resources are limited. You do have to deal with a board. There are these reasonable constraints. And so thinking about that when you're dealing with someone who's in academia, okay, they're dealing with the same kinds of constraints that I'm dealing with in my day job. Doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable. Doesn't mean you don't show up as an expert, but just understanding and coming at it from that angle rather than the kind of assuming that someone doesn't care as much as you do, even if they haven't had that lived experience. We can all empathize with each other. Okay, was there anyone else before I go to the next thing? Okay. So one of the things that I noticed here is when we talk about vetting a partner, kind of what is it that we're looking for to be able to identify the right kind of research partner? And so I know the S4A has an FAQ on a way to find research partners. There is a matching service that's available that's in that FAQ. One of the things that we will send out is the PCORI, which is an acronym that doesn't sound right at all. Foundational Expectations for Partnerships and Research. What's interesting about that one is that was actually updated in 2022. And if you were to go back to the previous one, and this is what typically medical researchers use, PCORI, it actually said things like you get input from the community, but you lead the team. You are the expert. You're the final decision maker. And for me, kind of coming from a healthcare background as well, one of the things that ends up being frustrating is you may not realize the American Medical Association continues to say that physicians are the ultimate leader and the ultimate decision maker. So even when you have a team of clinical experts coming together and that person they actually say professionally that this is how it has to be. And so these things are very recent. And that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, that we're in the middle of a changing tide. So you do have sort of a new, maybe generation, people who have been trained differently coming along. But anybody who was following those old PCORI guidelines, which old is 2014, is going to have a different sort of attitude towards community engagement, towards lived experience, and how they are approaching the partnership than someone who is utilizing the more updated ones, which came out in 2022. And they focus on all the things that we've talked about here that we know, make a good, solid, equitable partnership. So we'll send these out. There's also care principles for Indigenous data governance. There are some MOUs and agreements and things that that I'll put together, and Dr. Nathaniel, Dr. Espinosa I have a facilitation guide with the links in there. So I'll send all of that out, but just wanted to kind of talk about some of these experiences with vetting a partner and how you're choosing them. I think Thomas gave us a great example of how he, for one, isn't relying on a singular partner, which I think is important, to have those relationships that Mary Elena was just talking about. But also, how are you starting with a new partnership, and how do you know if this just isn't really a good fit, which I think we heard about from a couple of people today, versus something where you just go in and you're able to, again, use some of the information that we talked about today to say, hey, I understand you have this constraint. Let me tell you how my expertise helps you get where you need to go. Let me tell you why I'm a part of that peer community that you are focused on as a researcher, as an academic. So I kind of like to hear a little bit about that. Tori, I know I called on you like earlier, but I also feel like you miss talking right now. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, like, how are you going about that process of vetting who you want to work with? And are there times where you've just said, oh no, this is not going to work. This is not the right academic space for me. They just don't get it. What's your kind of red flag versus your, what do they call, like, do you go like no contact? I don't know how all the terminology that people use today. But. Okay. So I think Tori may not be able to. Jesse, would you like to jump in?
Well, I'm trying to unmute here. Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can turn my camera on for a second. Okay, there we go. All right. So now I was so frazzled trying to turn all the mic on and all the things. Can you please do a micro say again? Oh, when a community partner is not the right fit, right?
Or an academic partner is just not the right fit versus where you try to like work through it. So red
I think
flags versus just no go.
right. I think for me, it was when I introduce what I would like to do right away. Not right away, but after, there's some discussion, there's, sometimes pushback, not understanding, not a meeting of the minds, even when you express shared value. And I think I have learned over time that to take that as this isn't a good fit. This is not a good partner. This means you will be wrestling the whole way you're going. And so I have learned that sometimes no is okay. No is a good thing. When you get that pushback, that, kind of, it's almost like they don't want to understand, or they don't want to, even see what you're trying to do or participate. I've learned to just take that as a blessing, and it's totally fine, because I have found that when you do share your story or the work that you're trying to do, there is an opening of, there's like a spark that happens, that their alignment that happens. And I think once you can find that alignment, that not that it will be perfect, but you definitely want that early engagement to where they're wanting to participate. And so I've just learned that over time to just be okay with the no and count it as a blessing. And it's totally okay if that's how I flag that we wouldn't be a good partnership right now aligned. So always keep the door open and say maybe later, but yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that was perfect. And I think, in life, I think relationships are relationships regardless. So it sounded like to me that you said you weren't feeling the spark. And I think that works no matter what the kind of relationship is. If there's not that just like synergy, that spark. But how do you know that it's not just something where you could continue, like you said, is there something that you're looking for next time around when you leave the door open? Or do you always, are there any times when you just completely shut the door and say, hey, not for me, this isn't going to work?
I don't think I ever want to completely shut the door and say there's never ever. I mean, it's not like kind of like a dating relationship where it's a,
Right.
bad boyfriend kind of thing. But, because people change, leadership changes, there's always change happening. And so maybe there was someone in that group that would, emerge as a leader that maybe got you but couldn't speak because maybe the leader of that group didn't see the timing at the time. And so I always try, even if my feelings are hurt or whatever the thing, I always try to leave the door open. If I see them again, always speak, share progress, because you never know when you'll have that partnership in the future.
Great. So I hear that there could be change with the individual. There could be shifting priorities within the organization. And so you leave the door open because it could work out in the future. And so I want to just kind of go back for a second. This is a little bit impromptu, but we have a bit of time. So how is anyone, like, just show of hands, or if you want to just pop off mute, is anyone familiar with this idea of like type 1 thinking versus type 2 thinking and how that works? Never. Okay, great. Because then otherwise I'm just repeating things and people are like, oh yeah, I already know that. So there's this idea, and I tend to talk about it in terms of taking my daughter to a new school. So when she first started high school and we were new in the community, that first day of school, we got up a little bit earlier and we had mapped it out ahead of time. As a matter of fact, on Sunday afternoon, I drove by it. Not that that helped at all, but we figured out which side of the building the door is on. I did the GPS. We left, early. The lines were longer. The buses are trying to figure out where to go. She had to figure out how to get to her first classes, all those things, right? But then probably by week 2, at some point I'm waking up like barely on time, hair all over my head. She's rushing out. And then you get to that point where like I don't even remember how I got there. Like, at like 10 a.m., I'm like, oh my gosh, should I take Parker to school today? There's like that part where it becomes autopilot, right? So that's actually the difference between what we call type 1 thinking versus type 2 thinking. So type 1 is when I was super engaged because it was something new, something novel. Had to figure it out, had to learn it, had to plan ahead of time, did, all the things. As time goes on, it kind of commits to memory. We may say muscle memory, autopilot, however we talk about it. But basically, your brain kind of encodes it and your brain goes, oh, okay. And it starts becoming a part of what you do to the point that you may not even remember doing it. And I can't be the only one who's had that happen. Oh, did I even do that? Or I don't even remember getting here. I don't remember the drive this morning. But what would actually like drive me crazy is those days when there was like a weird construction thing, right? Or I couldn't go down the regular route. And the reason is because it then has to convert back. So I go from not having to think about it to almost like not even realizing it's happening and I can do it half asleep, to actually having to go back to type 1 thinking because I've got to like figure out the reroute. I might have to add more time. Things aren't going well. And then I'm saying choice words to people on the road as I'm trying to get my daughter to school that morning, right? And the reason I bring that up is because that's actually how our brains are designed. So a lot of people will tell you this and they'll say, so this is why change is hard, right? It's hard. People don't want to change because it gets kind of like encoded in your brain. your brain wires around something. And Jesse, it goes back to what you said. If there's a belief system, it's sort of human nature. You're kind of entrenched in that because your brain kind of wires and that becomes your default. I don't really view it that way. I actually think what happens is all the things that we don't have to do that we can encode, they get wired in our brain. It leaves room for us to pull the things out that we need to actually work on change. It means that you're not constantly working on everything. But if you need to change something or do something different, your brain actually does have the ability to do this. So in early education, I think there's a couple people here, we talk about how children, when they're very young, things get sort of wired in the brain. Research is showing that, neuroplasticity lasts, your brain can actually change. There's other things that can happen later on that can mitigate the impact. That's now helping people who were, victims of strokes, whatever things that we thought were permanent with the brain. We now realize the brain actually leaves a lot of capacity for you to be able to change. It will wire in new ways. It will use different sections of the brain if a certain section of the brain goes out. And so I'm saying that to you because people are, if they're willing, very capable of saying, oh, I had that wrong. Let me take a step back and figure this out. And so if you've ever done implicit bias training and all those things, that's all it is. It's telling people, hey, this is kind of your routine. This is what's been wired in your brain. You're going to have to recognize it, stop, and then just put the energy and actively try to change it. So when you're walking into the room, people may be resistant. There may be that natural resistance to it because it's something that they've wired in their brain, especially if it's something that they believe and they're confident in, that they have researched, they know well, and they are contributing to the community and they have their identity in it. That doesn't mean that you can't offer something that would help them to shift their perspective or that they're completely incapable. So there has to be the willingness there. But I just want to kind of throw that out there because we've talked about this in different ways today about what the institutional constraints are, what the belief systems are, if people are just being dismissive. And then also we have to think about how we engage. Are we being dismissive and feeling like this is just an out of touch, academic, someone who doesn't get it, they're just sitting in their office and I'm out in the real world. But we all have this capacity to actually be able to shift. And it's really about how do we negotiate it in a way that takes all of these things into consideration, that understands here's why it's happening. It could be because this is all their research, their body of research and everything they've done since they were completing their degree and their dissertation. It could be because this is what's happening in the peer community. It could be because there's institutional or financial constraints. So how do we work within those parameters, as someone said, and understanding those constraints to negotiate something and help them understand that there's still room to learn, that you might be helping them be the person who's on the cutting edge because they're the one who has the benefit of your wonderful community-based expertise. So, Maria Elena, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that because you just have so much experience. And I would just love to kind of hear, what you've experienced as far as being able to see people change or the willingness to change, even when they have those entrenched beliefs. And I think everyone knows I'm good for calling on people. Okay, Thomas, I see you're just as anxious to say something. Go ahead. Speak your mind.
I'm anxious to say things. Um, so I missed the last part of what you said because I started reading the email that came through. So I heard the first part, but can you just summarize the very last things that you were saying?
Sure. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about how people have the capacity for change and how you might be able to take some of these incentives that they have not to change
Right.
and use them to your advantage with your expertise from the community.
A lot of times when it's hard to get people to change when they've worked so hard at learning what they've learned. And that goes both ways from the community side or lived experience side or academic side. I think some of the ways that I've looked at doing this is valuing both sides. Like I value an academic and their mindset and their book knowledge and everything else. But I think there has to come a point where lived expertise is valued at a high level because lived expertise comes from a perspective of you cannot buy or go to a class to learn what I've learned. And so it's important that, the value of being able to see the person across the table from you, that they sit at the same levels and framework. So uh, I'll give an example of how I've began to value academics. And so, um, one of the things that I told you I walked into the board for the Morehouse School of Medicine Community Coalition Board with the mindset that you're going to extract from our community. But while you're extracting from us, I'm going to extract from you because I know that you're able to get funding faster than I can because research projects usually get funded at a higher level. And for academic institutions, they are even so much more. So I'm thinking that that's the way I was going in. But the reality is, when they approached as academics with, hey, I'm not Dr. Such and such, just call me by my name because I am also community. I am you, you are me, we are together. That was a healing moment. And then as we continue to walk through the process, it really began to open up. And then in 2017, we were my partner in good and we were, uh, and that's my academic partner. She and I were accepted to a CBPR, uh, I forgot what it's called, but through the University of Michigan, it was a 1 year thing that we began to learn. I began to see how the value of academia adds to what we do and really being able to document what we do so that we can have a legacy of information and data that allows us to build on our programming and so much more. So that is something that I could not do without them. On the flip side, there's so much more that or not more, but there's so much that we added to the other side that they cannot do without us. And so when we talk about community building, it's important for us to understand that, like, sometimes when that word is thrown out there and it starts from an academic side, it becomes an academic constraint of community building. This is the way we're going to build community. When it starts with the community starts from the standpoint of those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. Isaac said that earlier. And so it's important that what's thrown out there, when it has the word community in it, that constraint and where we built trust at is that it starts with community building. It's not, we're leaning on the community to build our platform. We're looking at how do we build community within both frameworks so that we can work toward a solution.
Yeah, so I think this is a good kind of takeaway as we, move towards the end of our time today is being bi-directional. And so that is really kind of the core of what we're talking about. So whether we're talking about, vetting a partnership, is this a good partnership for me to engage with? Whether we're talking about things like, as I said, we'll send out some links on the data sharing governance and how do you do that? How do we do that in an equitable way that doesn't extract or take advantage of the community? Whether we're talking about things like, student engagement and how do you get support from students and what does that look like? And then there's, how all that comes together. Um, it's that ability to, again, look at where they're coming from and then understanding that bi-directional value. So what you're bringing to them and what they're bringing to you. And I think the reason I wanted to talk through the academic piece and what their side of it is and why it may be that they're approaching it this way is so that you can know what to state as your value that you're bringing to them. It is only when you understand what they value that you can present how you're adding value. So that is really kind of the core, is that when we say equitable partnerships, it is, how is it bidirectional? How are you getting what you need? And how are they getting, things that benefit them in their research in an equitable way, in a way that is not harming the community? And Tori, I see that you said there's sometimes a disconnect between literature, research best practice, and what's actually happening in the community. And so I'll pause right there first. I think that's why we were talking about this idea of peers, right? Who is a peer? Because when you talk about literature, research, and best practice, those are all the same people. You're talking about, research is just present in the literature, and the research, and then that defines the best practice. So it's a little bit of an ecosystem that's all working together, and it's, the people who are in that research space who are defining it. So what we want to do is to help them to see that individuals with lived experience and people who are in the community are peers too. They are also peers. That's where the disconnect is coming in. And so, as you said, Tori, that's why community lived experience and academia partnership is so important, right? Because we have to open up that concept of who is a peer if you're actually going to get where you want to go. Now, we have to see the value in each other for the advancement of knowledge and real world change. And I think that's really insightful, Tori, because it is the two different pieces. So an academic is interested in the advancement of knowledge. That's what they're going for. So that's what you want to position for. I am helping you to advance knowledge. Okay. You are interested in real world change. And sometimes there's a little bit of overlap there, but not always, because
Okay, the fact that I can see you tells me that her screen froze. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Shoot. I wanted to hear the end of what she was saying. Is she coming back?
Dr. Stevens, can you hear us?
Oh, I hope we didn't lose her altogether.
You're on mute if you can hear us.
can you all hear me right now?
Yes.
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 Okay. Okay. So the beauty of that is somehow my computer made it to almost the end of this. But Jesse, I know you were saying something. So did you want to speak up?
No, I wanted you to finish your statement. You know?
Oh, okay. So I don't know if you all couldn't hear. So I was just saying that's the bidirectional piece that Tori brought up about the advancement of knowledge and the real world change. So where you're focused on real world change, it's important to position this when you're talking to an academic as to how you're contributing to advancing knowledge, because that's what they're doing. It is adding to the body of knowledge. And then for them, they are going to have to demonstrate how they're helping you create real world change. So I thought it was really wonderful the way that Tori framed that, because that is the bidirectional piece. They're focused on just adding to the body of knowledge, and you're focused on actually making change in the real world. So how do you make sure that you're contributing to their goal? Because I think even though we all may care about the same topic, still our goals are different. And so knowing how to position it, not just, oh, we care about this issue, but this is actually what your goal is in regards to that issue versus what my goal is in regards to that issue.
And I just want to jump in real quick because that is a reminder of how um, the advancement of knowledge is not just an academic side of things. We want to advance knowledge also of what we have. And so becoming a allowing community to be included in articles and development of knowledge is important. You know, there's a new book that's out, Principles of Community Engagement, third edition, and you know, I'm a co-author in that book. And then, you know, so many different journals that I've been co-author of and even leading in the work and so many other things. So the advancement of knowledge, you know, sometimes giving credit where credit's due, that sometimes community they can advance knowledge also because of their perspective of where they're coming from, not just from the research they've done, but because of the research they are sometimes. And so it's important to see that part. The other thing is allowing community, not only us investing into the advancement of knowledge, but inviting community to advance the support and services that are advancing, inviting academia into the community so they can be a part of, you know, really looking at the solutions and how those solutions are impacted by the knowledge that's out there. And so it's important that bidirectional is just another level of it, not just in the, you know, gathering of research or the fulfillment of a grant, but in the relationships that are built.
Yeah, I think you just kind of articulated, you know, especially in the first one about how community members can add to the body of knowledge and are part of adding to the body of knowledge. That is sort of the negotiation talking point of how and that's the idea, right? Is that you want to frame it with something that is aligned with the goal of adding to the body of knowledge, among other things that researchers are interested in. So using that language is very helpful to be able to help to, you know, move things forward, that you are able to contribute to that, and here's why you do it in such a unique way, and in a way that's really vital to the literature and to the knowledge base. And then, yes, that opportunity for a researcher to step out into the community and to learn, because oftentimes people just don't have that opportunity. It's never been a part of the process that they learned, and also maybe just never really considered it. Sometimes people just don't think about it too. Sometimes people are uncomfortable, so they may want to help with something, but actually going out and engaging with people may feel intimidating, or there may be cultural issues there as well. So again, these are things that you're offering that are of value, that are going to help to advance what they are doing as researchers and academics. We are down to 5 minutes, so I just want to acknowledge, I see Dr. Nathaniel and I see Dr. Espinoza here. I don't know if either of you have anything in addition to add, or if there were any key points as individuals who, you know, who are in that space of supporting community while also, you know, having a foot in academia. If there's anything that you wanted to say. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, Jesse, I didn't see your hand up. So if you have something to add, and then we'll go to.
Yeah, I just want to say briefly, when we're thinking of the community also, it's important that the community realizes that they're not just a part of the research, that they too have a part in becoming researchers, that they too have a part in arriving at the solutions themselves, that they too have a part in being the knowledge makers, and encourage them, empowering them to become a part of the knowledge makers as well. So that's a part of our job as advocates, to encourage them to become the knowledge makers as well.
Thank you. Let me double check. Dr. Nathaniel?
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Nathaniel.
Okay, go ahead, Doctor. You have something, because I do it straight away.
Yeah, no, I think it was really important to highlight that, we use the word community a lot in these spaces, but I think part of when we go into partnerships with who we see as someone is not from the community, it's really important to define who is in the community you're talking about, because a lot of the times academics, when they come into them, especially if they are people of color, especially if they are who they see themselves in the community, they use the royal we. They think they're part of the community. So when you start these partnerships, it's really important to define what you mean by lived experience, whose lived experience, what community, and the parameters of both what you're in and what they're in when you start these different partnerships with universities. So all of that was stuff that you guys have already highlighted, but I just noticed that we use these words quite frequently and we so rarely take the time to define them. And sometimes it would be really helpful at the beginning of a partnership.
Love that. Dr. Nathaniel, I don't want you to feel like you're put on the spot, but if you want to add something, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I just think more of like my experience of, working in education, but like having the three roles of working in administration where I do academic advising, but also being from community of color or from like marginalized or historically excluded community, but then also being in academia as well in that Venn diagram and how complicated it is. Straddling those three spheres is just what this conversation made me think about. But yeah, I'll just park that there. It's quite complicated when you're not on either side of the binary. And how do you navigate that so that you can earn the trust within all three spheres, at least in my case. And yeah, just navigating those three spaces. So that's what came to my mind through this conversation.
Yeah, and I did kind of want to say, there were a couple people who talked about how much more open things are now than they used to be with academics and just being willing to listen and hear. And I think that has to do with some of the increased diversity that we see within academia and people who aren't necessarily, I mean, I came, got my PhD a little bit later in life and had been working in the community. I'm also, a woman of color. I'm also, there's all the things. And so I think there's so many more people who are like you, who are like Dr. Espinosa, who are like me, who are also academics, that it does create more opportunity, but it's a long change and a long process. But I do think that that's part of why we even see the willingness to partner with communities like people like you, Dr. Nathaniel. So. Okay, well, we're right at time. As I said, Dr. Espinosa, I guess I'll go up on my computer and send you the information, and then hopefully we can get it out to people. And then, of course, if anyone wants the one-on-one time with me, I'm open to that. And hopefully we've found this somewhat helpful just to think through those partnerships, how you're vetting, what the constraints might be, the rationale behind it, and then therefore how you're able to position it so that you're adding value to the goals and things that they're doing, and they understand why it's meaningful and important for them to respond to your needs and what's needed in the community as well.
Thank you. This has been really insightful, and I've loved the discussion that you've facilitated. Thank you for your work on this.
Thanks. Okay, well, we'll see you next time.